The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before you even process what just happened. 1 second you're driving normally, the next your heart drops. You ease off the gas, glance at your speed, check your mirrors again. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? You pull over, hands slightly tighter on the wheel than usual. The engine idles. You can already feel that strange mix of confusion and tension building in your chest. The officer walks up slowly, calm, observant. And then it comes. I'm smelling alcohol coming from the vehicle. Right there, that moment, that single sentence changes everything. Have you ever been in a situation where an officer said something like that to you during a traffic stop, or even hinted at it, and you didn't know exactly how to respond? If you have, I want you to drop your experience in the comments, because what you felt in that moment matters more than you might think. And stay with me here, because later I'm going to explain why that one sentence, "I smell alcohol," is one of the most strategically used phrases in roadside policing, and what most drivers get completely wrong when they hear it. Let's slow this down and really understand what's happening. You're sitting there, hands on the wheel. The officer hasn't accused you of drinking directly, not yet. They've simply made an observation. That's important. It's not a charge. It's not evidence by itself. It's a doorway. When an officer says they smell alcohol, they're doing two things at once. First, they're putting you on the defensive. Second, they're fishing for a reaction. Not just your words, but your face, your voice, your hesitation, your breathing. Most drivers don't realize this, but at that exact moment, the officer is studying you more closely than at any other point in the stop. And this is where people start making mistakes. Small ones, seemingly harmless ones, but they stack up fast. Some drivers panic and immediately say, "No, I didn't drink anything." Too fast, too defensive. Others try to explain, "I had one beer a couple hours ago." That sounds honest. It sounds harmless. But what they don't understand is that they've just handed the officer something they didn't have before, an admission. Now the situation shifts. The officer no longer needs to rely solely on what they claim to smell. You've confirmed alcohol was involved, even if it was minimal. And then there's another common reaction. Silence, but not the right kind. You freeze. You hesitate. You look away. You say nothing, but your body language is loud. Your breathing changes. Your hands move. Your eyes shift. From the officer's perspective, that hesitation can look like uncertainty or concealment. So what's actually happening in the officer's mind right now? They're building a narrative, piece by piece. They're thinking, do I have reasonable suspicion to investigate further? Can I justify asking this driver to step out? Can I escalate this into field sobriety tests? And here's the key detail most people don't understand. The claim, "I smell alcohol," is often used as a bridge. It's a way to move the stop from a simple traffic violation into a DUI investigation. That doesn't automatically mean the officer is wrong. Sometimes there really is alcohol present, but sometimes that statement is based on something subtle or even subjective. Maybe it's a faint smell. Maybe it's coming from a passenger. Maybe it's something else entirely. But once it's said, the tone of the stop changes. Now let's talk about what you should say in that moment, and more importantly, how you should say it. Because this isn't just about words, it's about control. The most effective response is calm, controlled, and deliberate. Something like, "I understand what you're saying, officer. I'm not going to answer any questions, and I'd like to exercise my right to remain silent." That's it. No explanations, no defensive tone, no extra details. And this is where people get uncomfortable, because it feels unnatural, right? You're standing there thinking, if I don't explain myself, won't that make me look guilty? That's one of the biggest misconceptions out there. Silence, when used properly, is not an admission of guilt. It's a legal right. And more importantly, it prevents you from unintentionally giving the officer more information than they already have. Because once you start talking, you're not just answering the question you think you're answering. You're giving them material to interpret. Let me give you a realistic scenario. Officer, Have you had anything to drink tonight? Driver: just one beer earlier. Seems harmless, right? But now the officer hears, alcohol confirmed, timeline unclear, quantity uncertain, possible impairment. And then comes the follow-up. When was that? Now you're thinking, was it 2 hours ago? 3? You hesitate. That hesitation becomes another data point. Where were you drinking? Now your story needs to stay consistent. Details matter. You see how quickly this builds. This is why the initial response matters so much. Because once the conversation starts, it rarely goes in your favor. Now let's address something that a lot of people misunderstand. Invoking your right to remain silent doesn't mean the officer will just say, "All right, have a good night," and walk away. That's not how this works. The officer may continue asking questions. They may change their tone. They might become more direct. Why aren't you answering my question? Do you have something to hide? This is where pressure comes in, and it's intentional. They're testing whether you'll stick to your decision or break under discomfort. Because most people do break. They start explaining, justifying, trying to sound cooperative. "I just don't want any trouble. I'm not drunk, I promise." And just like that, the silence is gone. The protection you had is weakened. Now let's talk about another critical moment. When the officer asks you to step out of the vehicle. If they've already mentioned smelling alcohol, this is often the next step. "Go ahead and step out of the car for me." At this point, the situation has escalated, and legally, in most cases, you do have to comply with that order. But here's what many drivers don't realize. The moment you step out, the officer's observation becomes even more focused. They're watching how you move, how you stand, whether you sway, how you walk. Even something as simple as adjusting your balance can be noted. And remember, they already have a narrative forming in their mind. Now, if you've already admitted to drinking even lightly, every movement is interpreted through that lens. If you haven't said anything, the officer has less to work with. That doesn't mean they'll stop, but it changes the dynamics. Now let's go deeper into something most people never think about. Passengers. You might be completely sober. But what if someone in your car has been drinking? The officer says, "I smell alcohol." Technically, they didn't say it's coming from you. But if you immediately say, "It's probably my friend, he was drinking," you've just introduced alcohol into the situation yourself. Now the officer has reason to question the passenger. The focus expands. And here's where things can get complicated quickly. Passengers might say something that affects you, even unintentionally. "Yeah, we were at a bar earlier." That one sentence can shift the entire direction of the stop. Now the officer has more context, more justification to continue investigating. This is why controlling your own responses is so important. You can't control what others say, but you can avoid adding to it. Now let's address another uncomfortable reality. Sometimes, even if you do everything right, the officer may still proceed with a DUI investigation. They may ask you to perform field sobriety tests. And this is where a lot of people feel trapped. They think, if I refuse, I'll look guilty. If I agree, I might fail even if I'm sober. That's a real concern. Field sobriety tests are not as straightforward as people assume. They're subjective. They rely on the officer's interpretation of your performance. Balance, coordination, eye movement. These can be affected by stress, fatigue, nerves, even the environment. Uneven ground, poor lighting, traffic passing by. All of it matters. And yet most drivers don't question it. They comply without hesitation, hoping that cooperation will clear things up. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And here's the part that's rarely talked about openly. Officers are trained to observe clues, not just results. Even small missteps can be noted. Driver appeared unsteady. Driver paused before responding. Driver's eyes were watery. Individually, these might mean nothing, but together, they form a picture. That's how cases are built. Now let's circle back to that original statement. I smell alcohol. It's not just an observation. It's a pivot point. Everything after that depends heavily on how you respond in those first few seconds. If you rush to explain, you give the officer more to work with. If you argue, you escalate tension. If you stay calm, controlled, and limit your responses, you protect yourself from adding unnecessary information into the situation. And that's really the core idea here. You're not trying to win the interaction on the side of the road. You're managing it. You're controlling what you contribute. You're avoiding the small mistakes that turn a routine stop into something much more serious. Because once things escalate, it's very hard to walk them back. And one last thing that most people don't think about until it's too late. Tone. Not what you say, but how you say it. You can invoke your rights in a respectful, calm way, or you can do it in a confrontational way. Same words, completely different outcome. An officer is far more likely to remain professional if you do. But if your tone is defensive, sarcastic, or aggressive, the entire interaction can shift, and that shift can affect everything that follows. So when you hear those words, "I smell alcohol," don't panic. Don't rush to explain. Don't try to talk your way out of it. Pause. Think. Respond deliberately. Because in that moment, what you say or don't say matters more than most people realize. And once that moment passes, you don't get it back.